Be me, Colin, 31, operations manager for a medical supply company. My job is mostly preventing small mistakes from becoming expensive disasters: inventory schedules, vendor delays, delivery routes, staffing gaps, problems with names, numbers, and consequences. I like that kind of work. Not because it is easy, because reality has edges. If a shipment is late, it is late. If a warehouse is short 400 units, nobody asks whether the missing boxes are expressing an unmet attachment wound. Then I met Rachel. She was 29, finishing her master's degree in counseling psychology. Smart, articulate, warm in a way that felt almost illuminated. She had this soft intensity when she spoke, like every sentence had been filtered through meaning before it reached the air. We met at a friend's game night. She was sitting on the floor beating three grown adults at some complicated strategy game while explaining why competition revealed people's childhood coping styles. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. She looked up at me and smiled like she had been waiting for someone to get the joke. That was how it started. We talked in the kitchen for almost an hour while everyone else argued about rules in the living room. She asked careful questions, not generic ones, good ones. The kind that make you feel briefly more interesting than you actually are. What kind of pressure did I like? What kind exhausted me? Did I feel most myself at work or away from it? When did I learn to stay calm? That last one stayed with me. No woman had ever asked me that before. Most people just accepted calmness as a finished product. Rachel seemed interested in the machinery behind it. I found that attractive, dangerously attractive. We started dating a month later. The early days were incredible. She made ordinary things feel emotionally precise. If we cooked dinner, she noticed the way I moved around the kitchen. If we watched a movie, she noticed which scenes made me quiet. If I talked about work, she noticed the exact moment my shoulders tightened. She made me feel seen, not looked at, seen. There is a difference. At first, her therapy language felt like intimacy. She would say, "I hear the pressure in that." Or, "That sounds like it activated something older." Or, "I appreciate you trusting me with that." It was a little intense, but I liked it. I had grown up in a family where feelings were treated like bad weather. Acknowledge them briefly, then get back to work. Rachel seemed like someone who knew how to stand in the rain without panicking. For the first 6 months, I thought I was learning how to communicate better. Maybe I was. A little. I started naming things more clearly. I told her when I was stressed instead of disappearing into spreadsheets. I told her when something hurt instead of pretending I was above hurt. She praised that. She said I was doing the work. She said she felt safe with my willingness to grow. I believed her. Then the work became the whole relationship. Every disagreement turned into a session, not a conversation, not an argument, a session. If I said I disliked something, she asked what story I was telling myself. If I said she had been unfair, she asked why accountability felt unsafe to me. If I said I did not want to talk at midnight because I had work at 6, she said my avoidance pattern was showing up. Nothing could just be what it was. Everything had to be interpreted. Every sentence became a symptom. Every boundary became a defense mechanism. Every frustration became evidence of unresolved trauma. The first time I noticed the shift was over dishes, simple dishes. I had cooked dinner at her apartment, pasta, salad, garlic bread, nothing fancy. After dinner, I cleared the plates and stacked them by the sink. Rachel went to the bathroom. I rinsed the pan, wiped the counter, and loaded most of the dishwasher. I left 2 wine glasses because I was not sure if they were dishwasher safe. When she came back, she stared at the glasses. I said, "I wasn't sure if those go in." Her face changed, not angry exactly, disappointed, like a therapist watching a client relapse. She said, "Can we pause and notice what just happened?" That sentence became the sound of a door locking. I said, "What happened?" She said I had abandoned the final step of the task. I said I left 2 glasses because I did not know where they went. She said my defensiveness was interesting. I said I was not defensive. She said denying defensiveness is often part of defensiveness. I remember standing there with a damp sponge in my hand. Realizing I had entered a room with no exits, she asked me to explore whether I had a pattern of requiring women to provide invisible guidance. I said, "Rachel, there are two glasses." She inhaled slowly, then she said, "Minimization." Just one word, like a diagnosis. I apologized because I wanted the evening back. She softened. She said she appreciated my willingness to repair. Then she hugged me. The reward came after the confession. That was the first data point. There would be many. The second was at brunch with her friends. Most of them were in adjacent fields: social work, counseling, nonprofit advocacy, HR, people who spoke like every human interaction needed footnotes. Her friend Dana was the loudest. Dana had silver rings on every finger and the permanent expression of someone about to facilitate a difficult dialogue. She asked how Rachel and I handled conflict. I said, "Pretty calmly, I think." Rachel smiled tightly. Dana leaned forward. She said, "Calm can be a trauma response, though." I said, "It can be." Dana said, "Especially in men who intellectualize to avoid emotional accountability." Rachel looked into her coffee. That was my first warning. She did not defend me. She did not say, "Colin is actually pretty open." She let the frame settle over me. For the rest of brunch, every normal thing I said was gently translated into pathology. I liked routines, possible control issue. I preferred direct communication, possible discomfort with ambiguity. I did not raise my voice during conflict, possible emotional suppression. By the time we left, I felt like I'd been professionally disassembled by people who had met me 90 minutes earlier. In the car, I told Rachel that brunch made me uncomfortable. She nodded thoughtfully. Then she said, "I wonder if being perceived accurately feels threatening to you." I looked at the road ahead. I said, "Maybe I just didn't enjoy being analyzed by strangers." She said, "That's one interpretation." There was always another interpretation, usually one where she was insightful and I was avoidant. After that, the therapy talk became heavier. Rachel started using phrases like holding space and impact over intent as if they were court orders. If I forgot to text when I got home, we did not discuss forgetfulness. We discussed relational safety. If I wanted a weekend alone, we did not discuss rest. We discussed withdrawal and emotional unavailability. If I disagreed with her version of an event, we did not compare memories. We discussed gaslighting. That word appeared early and often. Gaslighting. It is a heavy word. It should have weight. Rachel used it whenever my memory inconvenienced her narrative. One night she claimed I had promised to attend a fundraiser with her. I checked my calendar. I had never agreed. I remembered saying I might be able to go if work allowed it. She said, "I need you to be careful because you're making me question my reality." I said, "I'm not making you question your reality. I'm telling you what I remember." She said, "That distinction feels manipulative." I stared at her. There it was again, the trap. If I disagreed, I was invalidating. If I explained, I was intellectualizing. If I got quiet, I was stonewalling. If I got frustrated, I was unsafe. The only path through was confession. So I confessed. Again. I said I was sorry for the impact. I said I understood how it could feel destabilizing. I said I would be more mindful. She cried. I held her. The fundraiser went into my calendar. That night I wrote my first note, not because I planned to use it, because I needed proof for myself. October 14th. Disagreement about fundraiser. My memory differed. Rachel called it gaslighting. Outcome: I apologized and attended. I did not know it yet, but that note would become a ledger. The ledger grew quickly. October 21st. I asked to delay a heavy conversation until morning because I had a 6 a.m. meeting. Rachel called it emotional abandonment. Outcome: talked until 1:40 a.m. and apologized. October 27th. I said her criticism during dinner felt harsh. Rachel asked why I was centering my fragility over her expression. Outcome: I apologized. November 3rd. I said I wanted one weekend without plans. Rachel called it avoidant distancing. Outcome: attended 2 social events, November 9th. I said Dana's comments made me feel judged. Rachel said discomfort with feedback is not oppression. Outcome: I apologized for being reactive. Looking at the notes was like watching myself disappear in bullet points. I had started the relationship as a person. Slowly, I became a case study. Rachel did not have arguments. She had formulations. She did not get angry. She got activated. She did not criticize me. She named patterns. She did not demand. She invited repair. The words were soft. The control was not. The strange thing was that I still loved her. That is what people outside these situations never understand. They imagine manipulation looks like a villain with dramatic music. It does not. Sometimes it looks like a woman you love sitting cross-legged on your couch, asking you to breathe with her before she explains why your perfectly normal objection is a trauma response. There were still good moments, mornings when she made pancakes in my shirt, walks where she held my hand and pointed out dogs with serious faces, nights when she fell asleep against my shoulder and I could almost believe the therapy room had closed for the day. Those moments kept me paying attendance, because that was what it became, attendance. Every conflict was a mandatory session. Rachel was the therapist. Rachel was the client. Rachel was the supervisor. Rachel was the ethics board. I was the patient. And somehow I was also always the problem. The breaking point started with my mother. She came to visit for a weekend. My mother is not a complicated woman. She is kind, direct, and has very little patience for people who turn simple things into ceremonies. She brought homemade bread and immediately started reorganizing my spice cabinet because apparently I had been living like a raccoon. Rachel tried to analyze her within 3 hours. At dinner, my mother told a story about me as a kid refusing to quit a terrible baseball team because I had promised the coach I would finish the season. She meant it as affection. Rachel tilted her head. She said, "That explains a lot about your overdeveloped loyalty response." My mother blinked. I said, "Rachel." Rachel smiled gently. She said, "I'm saying it with love." My mother said, "Sometimes love can just be love." The silence after that was magnificent. Rachel did not like being challenged by someone immune to vocabulary. Later that night, after my mother went to bed, Rachel said she felt undermined. I said my mother was just telling a story. Rachel said I had failed to protect our emotional container. I said, "Rachel, she is my mother, not a hostile witness." Her eyes narrowed. She said, "That sarcasm is a shield." I said, "No, it's a sentence." Wrong answer. The session began. She said my family system rewarded emotional minimization. She said my mother's bluntness had shaped my fear of vulnerability. She said my loyalty to my mother was interfering with individuation. I listened for 20 minutes, then 30, then 40. At some point, I realized she was not talking about the dinner anymore. She was building a theory where every person who loved me before her was part of the wound only she could name. That realization scared me, not dramatically, quietly, like finding a crack in a bridge you cross every day. I said, "I don't want to do this tonight." She froze. Then she said, "Do what?" I said, "A session." Her face changed. I had named the room. She said, "I'm trying to communicate." I said, "No, you're interpreting me." She said I was becoming defensive because we were close to something important. I said, "Maybe I'm tired because it's midnight and you're diagnosing my mother." She stared at me like I had slapped her. Then she said, "I don't feel emotionally safe with you right now." That sentence used to make me panic. That night, it did not. I said, "Okay, then let's stop talking." She looked confused. I got up, brushed my teeth, and went to bed. She slept on the couch. In the morning, she was distant. My mother noticed. Of course she noticed. At breakfast, Rachel said she had a lot to process. My mother buttered toast and said, "Processing is fine, dear, but don't forget living." I nearly choked on my coffee. Rachel left early that afternoon. She said she needed space. I said, "Okay." She waited. I think she expected pursuit. I hugged my mother goodbye instead. After she left, my mother looked at me for a long time. She said, "Colin, that girl talks like a pamphlet." I laughed. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and felt the laugh turn into something heavier. Because she was right. Rachel did not talk to me anymore. She talked at a theoretical man she had assembled from coursework, social media, and bad advice from friends who rewarded every escalation with the word valid. The next week, Rachel asked if we could have an intentional dialogue. That meant argument. I said yes. She came over with a notebook, an actual notebook. I remember looking at it and feeling my stomach drop. She had prepared discussion points. She started by saying she felt rupture between us. She said my refusal to engage the other night had triggered abandonment wounds. She said she noticed a pattern of me exiting conversations when accountability approached. Then she asked what came up for me hearing that. I looked at the notebook, then at her, then back at the notebook. Something in me settled. I said, "I don't accept the premise." She blinked. She said, "Which premise?" I said, "That every disagreement is a therapy session where you diagnose my resistance until I agree with you." Her mouth opened slightly. I continued. I did not raise my voice. I did not attack. I spoke like I do at work when a vendor claims a missed delivery was really a communication opportunity. I said, "If I disagree with you, you call it defensiveness. If I remember something differently, you call it gaslighting. If I ask to pause, you call it avoidance. If I get upset, you call it dysregulation. If I stay calm, you call it intellectualization. So the only acceptable outcome is me agreeing with your interpretation." She stared at me. I could see the machinery searching for a label. I said, "And before you name this as a trauma response, I want you to hear it as a boundary." Her face flushed. She said, "That sounds like therapy speak being weaponized back at me." I almost smiled. "Almost," I said. "Exactly." For the first time, she had no immediate answer. The silence felt different. Not peaceful yet, but clean. She recovered quickly. She said she was concerned about my hostility toward emotional work. I said, "I am not hostile toward emotional work. I am hostile toward being assigned homework for a class I never enrolled in." She said relationships require repair. I said, "Repair requires two people. Not one person interpreting and the other person confessing." She started crying then. Softly at first. She said she felt like I was rejecting the most important part of her. That used to get me. The idea that disagreeing with her method meant rejecting her soul. This time I did not move toward her. I said, "I am rejecting the way you use it." That was the first session I stopped attending. Not physically. I was still in the room. But emotionally, I stood up and left. After that, I changed my rules. Simple rules. If Rachel used a clinical label during a normal disagreement, I would ask for plain language. If she accused me of a serious behavior like gaslighting, I would ask for a specific example and evidence. If she turned my boundary into pathology, I would end the conversation. If she said she did not feel safe because I disagreed calmly, I would not apologize for imaginary danger. The first test came 2 days later. She called upset because I had not responded to a long text for 3 hours. I had been in a warehouse meeting. I said that. She said, "It felt like stonewalling." I said, "Stonewalling is refusing to communicate during conflict." I was at work. "What you mean is that you felt anxious when I didn't respond." There was a pause. She said, "Don't correct my language." I said, "Then use accurate language." She hung up. That would have destroyed old Colin. New Colin made dinner. The next test came on Saturday. We were supposed to go to a small art show with Dana. I said I did not want to spend my Saturday with someone who regularly analyzed me without permission. Rachel said I was avoiding mirrors. I said, "Plain language." She said, "What?" I said, "Say what you mean without the metaphor." She said I was being controlling. I said, "Specific behavior." She said, "You're telling me who I can see." I said, "No, I am telling you I am not attending. You can go." She stared at me. The old script had failed. She went without me. I stayed home, ordered Thai food, and watched a documentary about shipwrecks. It was the most relaxing Saturday I had had in months. No rupture, no repair, no attachment wound. Just noodles and maritime disaster. The piece was embarrassing in its intensity. I started noticing how much energy I'd been spending on emotional compliance. My apartment got cleaner, my workouts improved, I slept better. At work, my boss asked if I'd taken a vacation. I said no. He said, "You seem less tense." That was funny. Nothing external had improved. Only one thing had changed. I'd stopped attending the sessions. Rachel noticed too. She did not like it. She said I had become detached. I said I had become more selective. She said I was withholding vulnerability. I said, I am withholding consent to be diagnosed during arguments. She said I was making the relationship feel transactional. I said, no, I am making it mutual. That word irritated her. Mutual. It was not in her preferred script. Her preferred script had roles. She interpreted. I explored. She named. I owned. She initiated rupture. I performed repair. Mutuality ruined the choreography. For a while, she tried softer tactics. She sent articles about avoidant partners. She sent podcast clips about men who fear emotionally intelligent women. She sent a quiz about attachment styles. I did not take it. She asked why. I said, because I already have a job. She did not find that funny. Dana became more involved. Of course she did. Rachel told me Dana felt I was showing resistance to growth. I said Dana is not in this relationship. Rachel said outside perspective is important when patterns are hard to see from inside. I said, good. Aaron thinks you talk like a cult brochure. That was not my finest moment, but it was honest. Rachel gasped. She said, you discussed our relationship with Aaron? I said, you discussed our relationship with Dana. She said that was different because Dana had training. Dana worked in HR. Apparently that now counted as priesthood. The final escalation happened at a couples workshop. Rachel signed us up without asking. A Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. The title was Conscious Conflict and Relational Repair. I saw the email confirmation and felt my soul leave my body. I told her I was not going. She said refusing therapy-adjacent support proved my lack of commitment. I said signing me up without consent proved hers had become managerial. She cried. She said she was fighting for us. I said, no, you're scheduling my compliance. She went alone. That evening, she came to my apartment with that bright, charged look she got after being validated by strangers. She had worksheets, actual worksheets. She said the facilitator helped her understand our dynamic. I said, of course they did. She ignored that. She said I was operating from protective shutdown. She said my nervous system equated accountability with attack. She said my refusal to engage therapeutic repair was a form of relational abandonment. I let her finish. Then I said, Rachel, I'm going to ask you one question. She nodded, hopeful. I said, do you want a boyfriend or a client? The room went silent. Her face drained. I had found the sentence under everything. She whispered, that's unfair. I said, no, it's the question. She said, I want a partner willing to do the work. I said, the work always seems to mean me accepting your diagnosis. She shook her head. I stood up and went to my desk. I pulled out my notes, not a dramatic folder, just printed pages clipped together, dates, phrases, outcomes. I handed them to her. She looked confused, then worried. I said, this is every major disagreement from the last 4 months. She flipped through the pages. Gaslighting, avoidance, defensiveness, stonewalling, dysregulation, intellectualization, emotional abandonment, fragility, resistance. Every label had a date, every date had an outcome, every outcome was the same. I apologized, I adjusted, I attended. She stopped on the third page. She said, "You were documenting me." I said, "I was documenting the sessions." Her eyes filled with tears. I continued, "Do you know what I noticed?" She did not answer. I said, "In 26 recorded conflicts, you apologized first 0 times." She looked down. "In 26 conflicts, my interpretation was treated as valid twice. In 26 conflicts, the conversation ended only after I accepted your frame 23 times. In 26 conflicts, we solved the original issue maybe 4 times." I tapped the pages. The rest was just me being processed. She sat down slowly. The worksheet slid off her lap onto the floor. For once, the props looked ridiculous. She said, "I thought I was helping us communicate." I said, "You were helping me surrender more politely." That one hurt her. I saw it. I did not enjoy it, but I did not take it back. She said, "So what do you want?" I said, "Plain arguments." She blinked. I said, "If you're angry, say you're angry. If you're hurt, say you're hurt. If I did something specific, name the specific thing. But stop turning every conflict into a treatment plan." She was crying now. She said she did not know how. That was the saddest, honest thing she had said in months. I believed her. Somewhere along the line, Rachel had learned to feel powerful only when she was interpreting someone else. Plain hurt probably felt too exposed. Plain anger probably felt too ugly. So she dressed control in clinical language and called it healing. Understanding that made me feel compassion. It did not make me want to stay. She promised to change. For 3 weeks she tried. At least I think she tried. She would catch herself mid-label and rephrase. She would say, "I feel hurt," then look at me like she had jumped off a cliff. I would say, "Thank you for saying it plainly." Sometimes we actually talked, briefly, honestly, almost normally. But the damage had already learned my address. I could not relax around her. Every pause felt like a diagnosis loading. Every emotional conversation felt like a room with hidden cameras. Every apology from her sounded like a technique from page 7 of a workbook. One night we were sitting on my couch. No fight, no crisis, just quiet. She put her head on my shoulder and said, "I miss how we used to be." I said, "Me too." She said, "Do you think we can get back there?" I looked at the wall across from us. There was a small crack near the window I had been meaning to fix. I found myself more interested in that crack than in the question. That was when I knew. I said, "I don't think I can." She lifted her head. Her eyes were already wet. She said, "Because you don't trust me." I said, "Because I don't trust the room anymore." She understood immediately. Therapy language had taught her enough to recognize a metaphor when it was finally useful. She asked if I was breaking up with her. I said yes. Very quietly. She began to cry. Then she stopped herself. I could see her almost reach for the old language: abandonment, avoidance, withdrawal, trauma response. Instead, she covered her mouth and said, "This hurts." That almost broke me. Not enough to stay, but almost. I said, I know." She said, "I'm angry." I said, "I know." She said, "I wish you had told me sooner." I looked at her. She looked back. Then she closed her eyes. Because we both knew I had. I had told her in every language I had. She had just translated all of them into symptoms. The breakup was strangely calm, painful, but calm. She gathered her things from my apartment: a sweater, a book, a ceramic mug she liked. The worksheets went into her bag too. I was glad. I did not want them in my trash. At the door, she said, "I really did love you." I said, "I know." That was true. Rachel did love me. She just loved interpreting me more. Or maybe she confused the two so completely that she never noticed when one replaced the other. After she left, my apartment felt larger, not empty, larger. There is a difference. Empty means something missing. Larger means you can finally move your arms without hitting a wall. I slept 9 hours that night. No post-conflict recap, no midnight repair, no morning check-in about my energetic shift. Just sleep. Beautiful, silent, undiagnosed sleep. A month later, Dana texted me. A long paragraph. She said Rachel was devastated. She said I had abandoned a woman who only wanted conscious partnership. She said men like me benefit from emotional labor and then punish women for naming it. I read it twice. Then I blocked her. Not every message deserves a response. Not every accusation deserves a session. Rachel emailed once after that. Shorter than I expected. She said she had been rereading our conflicts in her head. She said she realized she often used insight to avoid vulnerability. She said she was sorry for making me feel like a project. I believed her. I did not reply. That was not cruelty. That was closure. Sometimes the healthiest conversation is the one you decline. 6 months later, my life is quiet again. Work is work. The gym is the gym. My mother still reorganizes things when she visits. Aaron still calls Rachel the webinar when he has had too much beer. I date occasionally, slowly, carefully. When a woman tells me she values communication, I listen for what she means. Communication can mean honesty. It can also mean surveillance with softer furniture. I learned the difference the expensive way. I am not against therapy. Therapy helped me after Rachel. A real therapist paid by the hour, in an office with boundaries, training, and the ability to say, maybe you were right to be upset. The irony is not lost on me. Actual therapy gave me back the confidence that fake therapy had taken. My therapist once asked what the relationship taught me. I said it taught me that language can be a scalpel or a leash. In the right hands, it helps you understand pain. In the wrong hands, it makes pain sound like your fault. Rachel wanted every argument to become therapy talk. She wanted the authority of healing without the humility of being wrong. She wanted conflict to be a room where she held the clipboard and I sat under the lamp. For a while, I attended every session. I confessed, I reflected, I repaired. I grew smaller in the name of growth. Then I stopped attending. I stopped accepting diagnoses from someone who benefited from giving them. I stopped confusing emotional intelligence with emotional control. I stopped mistaking vocabulary for wisdom. And when I finally walked out of the room, Rachel broke because the session could not continue without the patient. That was the whole trick. A therapist needs consent. A partner needs mutual respect. A relationship needs two people. Whatever Rachel and I had become, it had none of those things. So I left the office. I closed the door quietly. And for the first time in a long time, nobody followed me with a worksheet.